The Dragon Quest series needs no introduction. It's one of the series that gave birth to RPGs, and to this day is Japan's national video game. Can't go into any shop that sells gaming stuff without seeing merchandise for sale from this iconic franchise. Of course, that means the Dragon Quest series has a ton of sequels, spin-offs, and remakes across multiple platforms, especially Nintendo platforms. The Nintendo 3DS was no exception. This video is a retrospective of all these titles and their impact on the series in Japan and overseas. Yep, when I say all of them, I include the many Japan-only titles. So sit back, get a coffee, and relax. It's time to talk about Dragon Quest on the 3DS. If you're a fan of the Dragon Quest series or love obscure games, you might be familiar with a game called Dragon Quest Heroes Rocket Slime, not to be confused with the Dragon Quest Heroes Muso series developed by Koei Tecmo that came out years afterwards. Dragon Quest Heroes Rocket Slime is a localized version of the second entry in this spin-off series known as Slime Morimori. In Japan, this game was known as Slime Morimori Dragon Quest II, which was itself a sequel to a GBA game that was never localized. Yeah, it's a bit confusing. However, what's not confusing is that Square Enix decided to make the third and still most recent entry in this spin-off series, Slime Morimori Dragon Quest III Daikezoku to Shippuden, also known as Slime Morimori 3, released in Japan on the 2nd of November 2011. Yep, when Westerners hotly anticipated Super Mario 3D Land and Mario Kart 7, many Japanese gamers were anticipating Slime Morimori 3. Just a little side note before moving on, when video game magazines outside of Japan discussed this game, it was often referred to as Rocket Slime 2 or Rocket Slime 3. So to make things less confusing, I will refer to it as Slime Morimori 3. All three Slime Morimori games share the same core foundation, but each successive entry builds on the foundations set by the previous entry. In this series, you play as a slime in the 3D action platforming segments from a top-down perspective. You go around the stages collecting items and you return them to your hub on minecarts to use in tower defense action battle segments, bouncing around as the cute little adorable slime that you are. In previous entries, these action battle segments are physical tanks, but in Slime Morimori 3, these are enemy ships you encounter at sea. Yep, in Slime Morimori 3, you're sailing the seas and sinking them like pirates. To do this, you must throw items into cannons at the enemy ship to deplete their HP before boarding the ship yourself to destroy the engine. Once you destroy it, you win the battle and the ship capsizes. If the gameplay sounds simple, that's because it is. The Slime Morimori series is aimed at a younger audience than most Dragon Quest games, even by Dragon Quest standards. The story is also extremely simplistic, more so than in any other Dragon Quest. In Slime Morimori 3, you must go around the entire world, which is designed like our real-world human planet, on your boat to collect the 7 rainbow orbs that were stolen by the Tails Troop, the main antagonist of this game. It's nothing too special, but it gets the job done. Slime Morimori 3 also has a unique sense of humour and is one of the charms of the Slime Morimori series, with the dialogue being notably funnier than mainline games. What really helped Slime Morimori 3 stand out and become what many consider to be the best game in the Slime Morimori sub-series, and even one of the best Dragon Quest spin-offs, was taking the game out to sea. The open world map is beautiful with many secrets to discover, the battles are so much fun, and you can upgrade your ammo anytime, including with some silly items. Slime Morimori 3 also has multiplayer and Street Pass support, both unique to this entry, plus the net shop that previously featured in Dragon Quest IX returns here, allowing you to buy ship parts and rare items using the in-game currency. Yep, no microtransactions here. Something interesting about this game, but it had a collaboration in Japan with McDonald's of all things. The McDonald's DLC consists of 4 exclusive items and you'd need to revisit the restaurant once a week for 4 weeks to collect the full set. Plus, they offered an exclusive game for Nintendo DS owners titled McDonald's Slime Ship Battle DX. If you completed this game during the promo period, you get a 1-day coupon for food and drink from any McDonald's location in Japan. Now this is something we never get overseas. As for a worldwide release, this game did not get localized. In a 2014 interview with Siliconera, Dragon Quest mobile producer Noriyoshi Fujimoto and executive producer Yu Miyake claimed Square Enix was more open to localizing the Slime Morimori games. They said, "In Japan, we actually have a total of 3 titles in the Rocket Slime series. The Western version was the second game. Compared to say a game like Dragon Quest VII, it's less text to translate, so it's not an impossible amount. So if Rocket Slime 1 or Rocket Slime 3 might be a great candidate?" Of course, Square Enix ultimately decided against localizing the other Slime Morimori games, although I suspect if they were to revive Slime Morimori in the future, they would localize that game. Still, another comment from Yumiake in interview makes this unlikely, as he reveals that Japanese players aren't as interested in more Slime Morimori titles compared to the West. I would personally love to see a reboot because most Westerners don't even know this spin-off series even exists, or if they do know, they probably only played Rocket Slime on the DS, which is nowadays very rare and expensive. Plus, it never came to Europe, but did in Australia for some reason, even though they're in the same region. That said, after many years in development, a full English fan translation for Slime Morimori 3 came out in 2019 thanks to a group called Fan Translators International, who would later go on to do EX Troopers and Metal Max 3, two other cult classic RPGs on Nintendo handhelds. And most interestingly, they did a full interview with RPG sites on how they translated the game. This interview was done around the time of the original beta patch release in August 2019. This has since been succeeded by the full release. There's a lot of technical information that I'm not going to get into here, but I do encourage you to read the full thing. The link is in the description with all my sources, so I will quote a bit from the summary. I'm just excited to get this into the public consciousness. Most people don't seem to know that there are two other Rocket Slime games. Plus Ultra Mario laments that the series' history isn't as well understood in the West as it is in Japan. Kate Lancelot agrees, noting that a lot of comments on the release announcement amounted to, "Wait, there's a sequel?" Late to the discussion, Gerb sums it up best. "I hope the translation will show the cute, the fun, and the funny aspects of the game. That said, you don't need Japanese to play this game for the most part, although I recommend using a walkthrough you don't get stuck." The translation was of course well received. If you do play Dragon Quest Heroes Rocket Slime, this game is almost identical gameplay wise, so you'll adjust to this game easily. I absolutely loved my time with the game, despite being unable to finish it as I got stuck somewhere. It's one of my top 3DS games based on what I played purely on that alone. It oozes so much charm. That said, it's quite ironic that while this is the first game Square Enix released for the 3DS in Japan for the Dragon Quest series, it's the last entry in its respective spin-off series, having featured on the two previous Nintendo handhelds. It shows how transitioning to a new platform can be both a new beginning and a final chapter, depending on what the developers want to do with their games. However, it adds to the variety of Dragon Quest games on the 3DS, and it's by far the best game from the series for non-RPG fans to check out. And that's a win-win for everyone. In late 2012, Dragon Quest X was beginning to take off in Japan, having released for Nintendo Wii in August that year. Naturally, its success meant Square Enix had big plans for Dragon Quest X, including the first spin-off. Now, before researching this video, I had no idea this game even exists, and it's largely forgotten even among Dragon Quest fans. I even struggled to find footage online. Video production commentary aside, what is this game? Dragon Quest X Odekake Moshasu de Battle is a Dragon Quest X spin-off released for the Nintendo 3DS via the eShop for 600 yen. So it's not exactly going to set the world on fire, but it set the 3DS eShop on fire when Square Enix released it there in Japan on the 12th of December 2012, making it the first Dragon Quest game to release for the 3DS as a download-only title. The game was almost entirely shadow dropped, with its existence only becoming public knowledge almost a week before its release on the 4th of December. In a nutshell, it's basically the face raiders of the Dragon Quest series. You can use the 3DS camera to take photos of people's faces and create monster cards using said faces you can use in battles. These monsters all appear from Dragon Quest X Rise of the Five Tribes Online, and given that this game came out so long ago, the monsters in it will almost certainly be from the first two volumes, even though there are over 300 of them. Some of these stages also have lucky tickets, and if you complete these stages, you unlock rewards in Dragon Quest X. As to why this never got localized, the connections to Dragon Quest X are honestly pretty self-explanatory. However, given it's a cheap throwaway spin-off that utilizes the 3DS hardware in ways not much different to Face Raiders, also makes it worth noting. Additionally, as the 3DS eShop is now closed, you can't even buy this game anymore, hence the only way you can access it now is to download it illegally. Finally, the lack of overall impact on the Dragon Quest series means it's unlikely that Square Enix will ever revive this title. Terry's Wonderland 3D is the first remake of a Dragon Quest game to launch on the Nintendo 3DS, and was the first of 3 Dragon Quest Monsters titles for the platform. The original Terry's Wonderland was known as Dragon Warrior Monsters in the West, as we did get the original game back in the day on the Game Boy Color. Yep, that's how old this game is. Interestingly, this game was localized by Eidos, which given Square Enix later acquired Eidos, makes this very ironic. Dragon Quest Monsters 1, as it's also known as, was also the first Dragon Quest game in the entire series to get released in Europe. It was the very first Dragon Quest Monsters game to exist, and it came out around a time Pokemon was booming worldwide within the late stages of the Game Boy Color's life. While Dragon Quest Monsters started developing a cult following within Japan right from the start, it wouldn't catch on in the West. One notable aspect of this game are the main characters being from Dragon Quest VI Realms of Revelation. This is a game that we didn't get overseas until the end of the DS's life cycle. Terry's Wonderland is set before the events of Dragon Quest VI, featuring siblings Terry and Millie as children. The core premise of this game's story is that Millie gets kidnapped by monsters, and that Terry must journey to the Kingdom of Great Tree to find a way to get her back. He discovers if he wins the Monster Scout tournament, he gets one wish. Of course, that's the perfect opportunity to get his sister back. You don't need to play Dragon Quest VI to understand the story of monsters, it's completely standalone. Terry's Wonderland is a monster catching game akin to Pokemon. You go out into randomly generated dungeons, recruit monsters into your team, then train them up to win battles in the Scout tournament. There were some additions to differentiate Dragon Quest monsters from Pokemon, with some of the most notable including gendered monsters and breeding. Original critic reviews from what I could find of the original were generally quite positive. Dragon Quest Warrior's positive reception was a significant achievement. It replicated the charm of Dragon Quest on a tiny handheld, much akin to the original NES games that started the series. Plus, in what I've seen online, those that played Dragon Quest Monsters back then hold fond memories of it. Of course, because times change and remakes sell, Square Enix saw fit to remake the title on the 3DS. Thus, Terry's Wonderland 3D released in Japan on the 31st of May 2012, quickly becoming the definitive way to play this game. Alongside a huge visual and audio overhaul, the remake adds a day-to-night cycle, randomized dungeon layouts, which look quite similar to Compile Heart games, online multiplayer for up to 8 players, and the ability to import monsters from Joker 2. And of course, Mii support! It also added a 3D effect as per all early 3DS games, even if said 3D effect was minimal. Terry's Wonderland 3D Legacy is interesting from both official and unofficial perspectives. From an official perspective, Square Enix ported the game to smartphones in 2018, named Terry's Wonderland SP. This version is an enhanced port, adding a new area, new monsters, a ranked multiplayer mode, and more. Yet Square Enix didn't localise either version of this game. If Square Enix was to ever localise Terry's Wonderland 3D officially, it would likely be a port of this version. Unofficially though, Terry's Wonderland 3D is notable as one of the first 3DS fan translations to be announced and later completed. Yep, dedicated fans went out of their way to localise this game instead of Square Enix, thus helping to pave the way for the 3DS fan translation scene that exists today, and is nowadays thriving, especially given the 3DS is now a legacy platform. The patch has been well received, with fan translators attempting to replicate the charms of the series and updating the terminology the same way Square Enix would do, which I applaud. In terms of the 3DS library itself, Terry's Wonderland 3D was an important milestone in establishing Dragon Quest on the handheld long term in Japan. However, the bigger impact comes from Terry's Wonderland as a game. After all, this game birthed Dragon Quest Monsters, one of the largest running Dragon Quest spin-off games to date. It is one of the few big-budget monster-catching games that's comparable to Pokemon, which is an impressive feat. Plus, as I already touched on, Terry's Wonderland 3D's English fan translation birthed the entire 3DS fan translation scene, something that, even if you have no interest in Dragon Quest, have benefited from in some way. Dragon Quest VII was originally released for the original PlayStation in Japan in 2000. With it being a very late release for the system, it came out over a year later in North America under the name Dragon Warrior 7, whereas this game never came to Europe at all. Additionally, Dragon Warrior 7 would be the last localized Dragon Quest game to use the Dragon Warrior name. The core story of Dragon Quest VII involves going to seemingly detached islands and continents to find fragments of the tablets representing the world to restore it. To quote the box art of the localized 3DS version, from one little island to a world of possibilities. The original Dragon Quest VII had a turbulent localization history and a somewhat mixed reception both here and in Japan. Positive aspects include its class system, enjoyable gameplay, and great concepts. However, negative aspects include its dated visuals, especially compared to other PS1 RPGs, grindy battle system, and incredibly long playtime. Dragon Quest VII was the first 100+ hour RPG ever, and that's before doing all of the side quests. From a localization perspective, this meant there's way too much text. Localizers back then had a monumentous challenge to localize this game into English. They were still learning the building blocks that came with localizing text-heavy RPGs, something that, while still a challenge today, was so much more difficult back then. Other titles that faced similarly turbulent localization periods were Sakura Wars Song My Love, as well as The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky SC, which came out for PSP and PC. This is important as the issues would also apply to the 3DS remake, which I'll return to later. In November 2011, rumours swirled that a remix of the 7th entry in an iconic Japanese RPG series would be announced for 3DS at Nintendo's next Sales Celebration meeting in 2012. Many people believed it would be Dragon Quest VII or Final Fantasy VII. Of course, we all know what happened regarding Final Fantasy VII, but in the case of this rumour, the game in question was indeed Dragon Quest VII. In late October 2012, the Dragon Quest VII remake was announced in Jump Festa with a more general February 2013 release. Other details for the remake also came out over the following weeks, including a firm release date of 13th of February 2013. A major theme for this remake was accessibility to reduce the disadvantages I outlined, especially with the game's length and ambiguity regarding what to do. For example, Square Enix added a new radar feature, a shrine attendant, among various other tweaks designed to make finding fragments easier. This was done to reduce the overall playtime so that it's less bloated compared to the PS1 original and playable for more people. Most notably, the entire opening section of the game was completely reworked to the point where it's considerably more streamlined compared to the PS1 original. This normally doesn't happen when Square Enix remake Dragon Quest games, as they aim to be as faithful as possible to old traditions, in line with that series' ethos. This goes to show how a lot of players dislike the game's introduction in Japan. Regarding presentation, this version of Dragon Quest VII is 3D instead of sprites and features an orchestral soundtrack recorded live in Japan with Koichi Sugiyama himself composing. Additionally, various balancing tweaks have been done to the vocation system too, making an already fantastic class system even better. Regardless of what you think about Dragon Quest VII as a game, this 3DS remake is widely considered the definitive way to play it. It's more accessible, affordable, and easy to obtain legally. Or at least it was until the eShop closed, however physical copies in Europe are still affordable at the time of this video. Speaking of the European release, while the 3DS remake came out in Japan on the 13th of February 2013, it didn't come to Europe and North America until the 16th of September 2016, more than 3.5 years later. Regarding why it took so long for Square Enix to localize the game, the localization issues regarding consistency and updating terms, outline introduction when combined with the massive size of DQ7's script are why. That same Siliconera interview I mentioned in introduction also discusses this. In terms of Dragon Quest VII, it has a lot of text to go through and translate, and we've received so many requests and so much positive feedback about the game, but unfortunately we have to consider the cost and manpower needed to handle the sheer load of text. In terms of scenario and script, this game is probably one of the largest in the DQ franchise. If a lot of people can buy it and support it, well, we can't promise anything. Going back to people who want Dragon Quest VII to come out, we've got a lot of requests, we really want to do it, but right now we need to hammer out what kind of resources we need to do it. We say this a lot, but we can't seem to get to the point where it's justifiable. This interview prompted fans to start attempting to translate it themselves. However, Square Enix hit this project with a DMCA takedown request, which led to even more frustration from fans at the time. There were two reasons Square Enix did this. The first was that this fan translation used the copyrighted PS1 script with all those outdated terms, creating obvious legal ramifications even compared to other Dragon Quest translations. The second reason, while not explicitly stated here, was that Square Enix finally accepted they had to localize Dragon Quest VII and took the fan translation down to not hamper sales. Hence fans were more optimistic that an official confirmation was imminent. Then in November 2015, it came. An official release was confirmed with Nintendo publishing Dragon Quest VII and VIII outside of Japan. Fans could finally rest easy after their literal years of campaigning efforts for Dragon Quest VII that were quite extraordinary and effective. In a 2016 Kotaku interview, series presenter Yu Miyake explained the reasoning as follows. "We actually had no plans of releasing it at first. It was because the text was so huge that considering the cost and time that went in, we didn't think it was worth it. Actually, a lot of core fans from France approached us, and then we received letters, not just us, but the CEO of our company as well as Nintendo, and everybody else that was involved, requesting a localized version of Dragon Quest VII. They were even saying at one point that they'll localize it themselves for us. Because of that high demand, we realized we really had to do this thing." So first off, thank you to all French Dragon Quest fans for this. This reinforces that if you want companies to localize their games, letter writing campaigns work, whereas social media campaigns are much less likely to work. It's another successful localization of an RPG driven by a fan campaign, following Operation Rainfall earlier that decade. Additionally, credit is due for both Yu Miyake and Square Enix for revealing this information. There's one more thing I need to touch on. The orchestral soundtrack recorded by Koichi Sugiyama was removed for the worldwide release of Dragon Quest VII. Instead, it was replaced with a synthesized version that, while still good, is inferior to the original and disappointed many fans. The most likely reason for this is licensing. After all, when Sugiyama was alive, he was likely asking Square Enix for way more money than they were willing to pay him to use his music overseas. This is especially so given the fact that Square Enix hesitated to localize the game at all to begin with. It's a shame Square Enix couldn't include orchestrated music, but assuming licensing issues were the cause, I understand why. That said, there is a mod out there that does restore the orchestrated music into this localized release. Dragon Quest VII in many ways was a watershed moment for the series, both during its original release cycle on the PlayStation and its 3DS remake. It's a game that showcases the strengths and limitations of long RPGs. Thus it does for a passionate fanbase that, while it may not be large in size, are willing to do extraordinary things to bring the media they love to the world. Square Enix's series of remakes continues on the Nintendo 3DS with another classic title in the Monsters series, Dragon Quest Monsters 2. Dragon Quest Monsters 2 is one of the very few RPGs to feature dual protagonists, in this case siblings Cobi and Tara, known in Japan as Iru and Luca. Unlike a lot of Dragon Quest spin-offs, they are original characters. They moved to the island of Great Log with their parents, who are monster mashers, who are a class you might be familiar with if you've played other Dragon Quest titles. Plot of this game is as follows. When their mother sends the siblings on a simple errand, various events follow, putting the entire island of Great Log at risk. Thanks to a confrontation between the siblings and known troublemakers Prince Kameha and Scruffy, they accidentally knock the plug out. This plug enables Great Log to even stay afloat, hence the whole island is now in danger. After Scruffy fills the plug hole himself, the siblings are tasked with finding a way to plug the gap to free both Scruffy and the island of Great Log, and of course, you get a slime as your first monster companion. The biggest evolution in Dragon Quest Monsters 2 is changing the randomly generated dungeons from Terry's Wonderland into uniquely designed maps, all with their own characters, stories and monsters to scout. Not to mention the unique terrain you need to navigate, such as rolling waves and fluffy clouds. Dragon Quest Monsters 2 was a successful release in Japan when it came out for the Game Boy Color on 9th of March 2001. Enix released them in two versions subtitled Kobi's Journey and Tara's Adventure respectively. For consistency's sake, I will continue referring to the protagonists under their English names, Cobi and Tara. Yep, the Pokemon influence rubbed off here given that there are differences in monster frequencies and aesthetics akin to the Pokemon games as well. Enix localized the Game Boy Color originals in North America themselves on the 15th of September 2001, while Europeans didn't get the game at all. Additionally, both Dragon Quest Monsters 1 and 2 would be remade for the original PlayStation in Japan the next year, which also didn't get released in the West. Rumours of a Dragon Quest Monsters 2 remake for the 3DS first circulated in April 2013, following on from a trademark filed by Square Enix. Before it was formally announced, Dragon Quest Monsters 2 Cobi and Tara's Marvelous Mysterious Key was later released in Japan for the 3DS on the 6th of February 2014. This version combined the original Game Boy Color releases into one title in a fully 3D environment, just like the Terry's Wonderland 3D remake. Many new features were added to this 3DS remake, making it the definitive version of the game. There are over 800 monsters to recruit, which is way more than the previous game, including monsters from the then brand new Dragon Quest X. You can also choose whether to be Cobi or Tara right from the start and utilise the new whistle and dance ability skills. You can also use the monster customization feature, allowing you to make your own monster using customizable head, body, arm and back parts. Additionally, you can transfer monsters and data between this game and Terry's Wonderland 3D upon clearing both games. There are many more features, however, those are some of the highlights. Much like Terry's Wonderland 3D, this remake also got an enhanced port in Japan for smartphones on the 6th of August 2020. Features added include Monster Battle, online multiplayer, and monsters from Dragon Quest XI, making this the most monster-heavy Dragon Quest Monsters game at over 900 monsters. This is the definitive version of the game content-wise, and if Square Enix was to ever localise Dragon Quest Monsters 2, a console port of this version is what is most likely. Yep, Square Enix did not officially localise Dragon Quest Monsters 2. Upon the Japanese release of this game, fans following Japanese gaming news abroad increasingly concluded Square Enix is actively choosing not to localise Dragon Quest games on the Nintendo 3DS. This led to fan outcry online, even as Square Enix later officially ended the second mini Dragon Quest gaming drought with Dragon Quest Heroes on the PlayStation 4. That said, the lack of a localization encouraged fans in the GBA temp community to translate the Dragon Quest Monsters 2 remake themselves. The patch itself has a lengthy history. 2 different teams attempted to translate the game but kept running into a major tricky technical limitation. This limitation stopped a full-blown English release. To quote one of the mod's authors, the fan translators were, quote, completely stuck with a limitation built into the game by its original developers. The team could not show more than 50 or so characters on screen during any dialogue sequence. While this might have been fine for the Japanese language, this would not work for a full-blown detailed English script. Text limitations like this were quite common with Japanese RPGs, especially older titles from the 1990s, but they are infrequent nowadays. However, they do persist in some form in newer games like the 3DS remake of Dragon Quest Monsters 2. They weren't insurmountable though, as a third person managed to find a solution and solve this technical issue. On the 1st of April 2021, the first version of the full English translation patch for Dragon Quest Monsters 2, Cobi and Tara's Marvelous Mysterious Key came out. 1.1 version of the English translation followed later that August, with a French translation coming much later. And they're not done yet! They're also working on Spanish, German and Italian localization. This would bring what Square Enix would do if they ever localized Dragon Quest Monsters 2 themselves officially. I personally haven't played Dragon Quest Monsters 2 yet, however, from what it sounds like from doing my research for this video, I'm prioritizing it. Simply put, Dragon Quest Monsters 2 is an achievement in so many ways, from its original Game Boy Color incarnation right the way through to Square's additions in the remake. The game itself innovated the winning Dragon Quest Monsters formula. Additionally, the lack of an official release paved the way for fans to step in and with years of persistence and collaboration, localize it at last. Early in the video, we touched on the first Dragon Quest X spin-off for the 3DS. Since then, Square Enix ported Dragon Quest X to the Wii U, PC, iOS and Android in Japan. Not just out of necessity, as the Wii was dying in Japan by that point, but also because Dragon Quest X was a phenomenal success. Of course, given Japan primarily games on handheld systems, Dragon Quest X still had untapped markets. At the time, the 3DS and PS Vita were the handhelds of choice for millions of Japanese gamers. Given the Vita's declining audience, that wasn't really an option, hence Square Enix chose to bring Dragon Quest X to the Nintendo 3DS. What makes Dragon Quest X unique on the 3DS is that it utilises cloud streaming technology and requires an online connection. It's not dissimilar from many big budget live service Western games that came out for the PlayStation and the Xbox, but instead here it is, on the Nintendo 3DS! And Square Enix announced cross-platform play with all other versions of Dragon Quest X, so 3DS owners wouldn't miss out. It released in Japan on the 4th of September 2014. Of course, there were other unique elements to this release too. One of which is that the physical package for the game doesn't even contain a cartridge, it's a download code only, and its code isn't even for the game itself, it's for an app that allows you to stream the game. There are various details on this app online, and if the screenshots are anything to go by, it's a typical MMO app enhanced for the 3DS. There is the post office feature that allows you to write letters for your friends 3DS, and the Traveller's Bazaar that lets you view, but not buy, items available in bazaars across the world. There are Street Pass features that let you exchange data with other players. There's a double Street Pass feature designed for those who play Dragon Quest X on your 3DS simultaneously, which is kind of bizarre, but okay. However, there was a major negative aspect to this release: the extreme number of technical issues that plagued the 3DS version of Dragon Quest X at launch because the servers were overloaded. In fact, the issues were so bad, Square Enix temporarily stopped shipments of Dragon Quest X to fix these issues. Siliconera translated some Amazon Japan reviews of Dragon Quest X on 3DS at the time this was happening. I'll read some of them here as they're pretty self-explanatory. For the past 2 days, I've been getting numerous login errors and haven't been able to play much. Today I successfully logged in at 9:30 PM and was excited, thinking, alright, let's go level up, and went to a popular hunting area. Then out of nowhere, I got a message saying, your connection is low, and then it suddenly disconnected me. Since then, I've tried logging in on numerous occasions, but I keep getting errors. What is this? Can this game not be played after 10 PM or something? It's as if the system was made to barely be playable on Nintendo 3DS. The tiny text makes it hard to read. The chat's text is practically like cryptograms. Even the regular text is very small. It's quite terrible. I'm playing on a 3DS XL, and even with the XL, the text is quite inconvenient, so I could only imagine what it must be like on a regular 3DS. However, the one thing that stood out most is the sound skipping. And when I talk about it skipping every now and then, it seems to constantly skip the choppy sound, which makes you think that your speakers broke. It's really a shame considering Dragon Quest's spectacular music. If anything, I truly demand that they take immediate measures and make fixes to at least fix this aspect of the game. Given Square Enix would later go on to ruin Kingdom Hearts on Switch by making cloud versions of all of those games, with their own issues, it's unsurprising they didn't learn lessons from this disastrous launch of Dragon Quest X on Nintendo 3DS. Of course, the localization aspect of Dragon Quest X is already widely known, so I won't touch on it much here, but frankly, the 3DS version never stood a chance of getting a Western release in any form. The cost of localizing Dragon Quest X and maintaining servers for an MMO primarily playing the small but passionate Dragon Quest fanbase wouldn't be worth the cost on PC, yet alone on commercial flops like the Wii U and the buggy mess that is the Nintendo 3DS. Plus, the internet infrastructure just isn't there for most of the world for cloud gaming or streaming in 2023, yet alone 2014. It was always only ever viable for a Japanese release. And as for fan translations, they exist for other versions of Dragon Quest X, and there are workarounds, so you can play Dragon Quest X online if you're an English speaker. There is also the Dragon Quest X offline release for Switch and PS4, which came out more recently, so if Dragon Quest X is ever officially localized, that is the version we will likely get. From a collecting perspective, there is no real point in purchasing Dragon Quest X. I couldn't find a source during my research, but I think it's safe to assume support for Dragon Quest X on the 3DS ended some years ago. The original Wii version was only shut down in 2017, so I wouldn't be surprised if support lasted much longer than many expect. You're basically buying a fancy box for way too much money, as Dragon Quest X on the 3DS is very expensive now. Nowadays, Dragon Quest X on 3DS is a footnote within the lengthy history that is Dragon Quest X. The way Square Enix ported and released the game is what is interesting about it. But outside of that, Dragon Quest X is an iconic game with a long life ahead of it still. Many Japanese gamers play Dragon Quest X on 3DS and hold fond memories of it despite its flaws. So even if the overall impact of Dragon Quest X on 3DS was small, for that subset of players, Dragon Quest X is more than a footnote. It was a big part of their gaming world. If you know anything about the 3DS game library, you might have heard of a game called Theatrhythm Final Fantasy. If you've heard of a developer called Indie Zero, that's because they're most known for working on the Theatrhythm games. Theatrhythm Final Fantasy is a rhythm game set in the world of, well, Final Fantasy, that came out early in the 3DS's life. It got an enhanced port as well, called Curtain Call. While I never really got into Theatrhythm Final Fantasy personally, it was a very well received game by both rhythm game fans and Final Fantasy fans alike. It was a winning formula, hence why it makes sense Square Enix branched out from Final Fantasy for this third entry in the Theatrhythm series, releasing in Japan on the 26th of March 2015. So what exactly made Theatrhythm Dragon Quest so special? Well, like other Theatrhythm games, it essentially combined turn-based RPG mechanics and environments with rhythm gameplay in 3 different ways. They are the battle music sequence, where the players defeat monsters one after another in a first-person perspective. The second, field music perspective, features the characters travelling throughout the worlds of each featured Dragon Quest title. The final type, event music, features song gameplay in front of various event sequences from the titles in question, like a music video. The Dragon Quest games featured in Theatrhythm Dragon Quest were each mainline Dragon Quest entry from 1 to 10. Although, as X is still ongoing, anything from X included within Theatrhythm Dragon Quest came out before 2015. That said, there is no original music from spin-off titles included, it's all mainline here. The music is all orchestrated by Koichi Sugiyama with it sourced from games, symphonic suites and covers made for spin-off titles such as Dragon Quest Builders, which came out the same year. The exception is the original 8 and 16-bit music used in the event music sequences covering the older games. But let me tell you something, if you're a fan of the Dragon Quest games, you will love these sequences. Even if you can't understand the language, seeing the events of these older games in the background while you're playing brings all those memories back. That is by far the most unique aspect of Theatrhythm Dragon Quest. Some other unique features include an incarnation of the Treasures and Trapdoors minigame seen in other Dragon Quest titles, as well as the Quester's Rest Tavern from Dragon Quest IX, serving as the party select menu. Additionally, All Trades Abbey also exists within the game, allowing for characters to change their class. As for why Theatrhythm Dragon Quest didn't get localized, remember what I said earlier regarding licensing issues with Dragon Quest VII's music? Well, that's the most likely reason Square Enix passed on localizing this game too. Given that Theatrhythm Dragon Quest is a rhythm game, having the orchestrated music is even more vital to truly enjoying the experience. It would have been a huge misstep for Square Enix to localize Theatrhythm Dragon Quest using synthesized music. It would defeat the point of localizing it, and they know it. I also think this is why there is no Dragon Quest music in the newest entry, Theatrhythm Final Bar Line, which Square Enix released for modern platforms earlier this year. As well as Final Fantasy music, Square Enix included tracks from most of their other series within Final Bar Line, such as Chrono Trigger to Xenogears. However, Dragon Quest music is notably absent. And before anyone says it, yes, Kingdom Hearts music is also absent. However, much like Dragon Quest, Square Enix does not own Kingdom Hearts, Disney does. Plus, Kingdom Hearts got its own rhythm game, Melody of Memory, which did get an overseas release. Could Theatrhythm Dragon Quest come west in the future? I think if it does, it'll be via an enhanced port. Could a Theatrhythm Dragon Quest curtain call might happen after Dragon Quest XII comes out? Maybe. I think that's the best shot of this game coming west. Regardless, I wholeheartedly recommend you check out Theatrhythm Dragon Quest. Currently there is no English fan translation available, however that's okay. You do not need to understand Japanese to play this game, after all it's a rhythm game. The menus are also easy to navigate and you can work out what to do, especially if you're already familiar with Theatrhythm Final Fantasy. Personally, I think this game is fantastic, especially if you like the Dragon Quest series. You can easily get into it. The music is great, the gameplay is amazing, the graphics and visuals are lovely too. It's a huge treat for fans of Dragon Quest games as well as rhythm titles more generally. In many ways, Theatrhythm Dragon Quest is Square Enix applying a winning formula to another one of their iconic franchises, which it succeeds at brilliantly. And looking back now, it's still one of the most unique 3DS games, one of the best Dragon Quest spin-offs, and a title that's perfect for new 3DS importers to get stuck into. Dragon Quest VIII Journey of the Cursed King is the first Dragon Quest game for so many people, especially in Europe, as this was the first mainline localized game that we got. It was the most popular Dragon Quest game in the English-speaking JRPG fanbase, at least until Dragon Quest XI came out. Originally released for the PlayStation 2 on the 26th of November 2004 in Japan, it was almost a whole year before it came out in North America on the 15th of November 2005, and then 6 months later in Europe on the 13th of April 2006. This game was also developed by Level 5, who became more well known outside of Japan thanks to this game, alongside the likes of Professor Layton, Dark Cloud, and later titles like Ni no Kuni and Yokai Watch. The core story for this game is the same in all versions. The Kingdom of Trodain was inflicted with a horrific curse. Most notably, its king and princess were transformed into a toad-like creature and a horse respectively by Dulmagus, an evil wizard. You, the hero, travel around with them to find a way to break this curse and save the Kingdom of Trodain. It's a simple premise but transformed into an elaborative, epic story with charming characters, an enchanting world, and innovative gameplay. And of course, to follow on from the previous 7 remakes, Square Enix remade this game for the 3DS. Announced on the 12th of May 2015 for a release later that year on the 27th of August, Dragon Quest VIII's 3DS version had a slew of new features included. The biggest addition is 2 new playable characters. They are Red, who joins you at a certain point in the story, as well as Mori, who runs the monster arena and have previously appeared in other Dragon Quest spin-offs, including the unlocalized Monster Battle Road series. There is new story content including more context for the heroes and Princess Medea's relationship, Dual Magus' original motives, and insight on Marcello and Juggerworth, the latter being a new character for this 3DS release. There's a new camera mode using the 3DS's camera, as well as items that enable you to ride silver and black sabercats. Additionally, the Japanese version adds voice acting, making it the first Dragon Quest game to do so at the time. That said, there is no 3D effect. At this point, 3DS developers were scaling back support of the 3D effect on the 3DS because interest was waning. This meant that many 3DS games released later into the system's lifecycle do not use 3D at all, and Dragon Quest was no exception. As of the Dragon Quest VIII Remake, Square Enix stopped supporting 3D on the 3DS with the Dragon Quest series. There are also 2 cases of censorship. I normally avoid discussing censorship at all on my channel due to how toxic the discourse around it tends to be, especially given the politics of its most vocal proponents, but as it has caused some controversy with the 3DS remake, and to ensure that this video is as comprehensive as I can make it, I have to touch on it. One of these cases is a spoiler, so I'll discuss the other one. The scene that Square Enix censored involves side character David being forced to eat dog food after being falsely accused of attempting to poison Sir Leopold's dog food. This censorship was likely done due to stricter requirements by the Japanese ratings board Sero that were brought in since the original PS2 release. Given Square Enix likely wanted the 3DS remake of Dragon Quest VII to carry a Sero A rating like most other Dragon Quest games, they chose to censor it. It's not a big deal, but it's a classic example of how censorship is part of the reality of business. Regarding the worldwide release, there is some overlap between Dragon Quest VII, so to avoid repeating myself too much, I'll be brief. Both games were announced at the same time during the same direct. Much like Dragon Quest VII, Nintendo also published Dragon Quest VIII outside of Japan. It was announced for 2016, but it slipped into 2017, and given how amazing 2017 was for video games more generally, it slipped under the radar. Understandably, due to the prompt localization announcement and turnaround time, an English fan translation does not exist, nor was it attempted. Like Dragon Quest VII, Dragon Quest VIII's orchestral score was also replaced with a synthesized track, but this music was restored by modders. This is ironic considering the PlayStation 2 release uses synthesized music in its original Japanese version, but orchestral overseas, whereas the 3DS version is the opposite. Plus, the 3DS version of Dragon Quest VIII, much like Dragon Quest VII, is still affordable in Europe at the time of this video. There is a debate in the Dragon Quest community as to whether you should play the PlayStation 2 original, the 3DS remake, or the mobile port. While the 3DS version is objectively the definitive version due to all the new content, the sacrifices made to the visuals, the lack of 3D, and no orchestrated music in the West lead some people to prefer the PS2 original. It's basically the Dragon Quest equivalent of Persona 3, whereas Persona 3 also has no true definitive version. However, if Square Enix ever do decide to make an ultimate definitive re-release of Dragon Quest VIII in the future, and I imagine they likely will, they are likely to include all the content in one release, unlike Atlus are doing with Persona 3 Reload. For me personally, both are great. I personally prefer the 3DS version due to the fact there is far less grinding. However, the PS2 version still looks and sounds amazing to this day, so I can see why people prefer it. Additionally, the added content alone further develops the story and the world. That said, I do recommend playing a modded version with the orchestrated music and if possible via an emulator for graphical enhancements. Those are workarounds for the major cons of this release. Whether you play on PS2 or the 3DS, it doesn't change the fact Dragon Quest VIII is incredible. It's still considered to be among the best in the series, and alongside 5 and 11 is recommended for new players. Its 3DS incarnation makes one of the best PS2 RPGs one of the best 3DS RPGs too, introducing more players to the world of Dragon Quest just as the PS2 original did all those years ago. That's the biggest part of Dragon Quest VIII's legacy, and this fact is a lot more widely understood than any other Dragon Quest game Square Enix ever released for the Nintendo 3DS. After all, Dragon Quest VIII was the series' first big success in the West on the PlayStation 2. However, in the case of 3DS, it was the last release for the platform overseas. 2 months after the Western release, Nintendo released the Switch worldwide. The Switch's roaring instant success led to 3DS software sales collapsing as folks moved over to the Switch, which made further localizations unlikely. Hence, the door for official localizations for Dragon Quest from this point on has now closed. We're coming to the end of the Dragon Quest spin-off games on the 3DS, so what better way to end the run of Dragon Quest spin-offs than the finale of the popular Joker sub-series, part of the Dragon Quest Monsters franchise. The first two Joker games were released back during the days of the Nintendo DS. Unlike the previous Dragon Quest Monsters games, they were the first 3D titles in the series and innovated that sub-series a lot for the time. They were quite impressive. In fact, many of these innovations would be carried over into the Monsters remakes, such as removing random battles. Both Joker games were released in North America and Europe. If you collect RPGs for the Nintendo DS or otherwise played Pokemon and Pokemon-like games, you've probably played them, especially Joker 2, which until recently was quite affordable physically, given how Nintendo published it in Europe following the success of Dragon Quest IX overseas. Additionally, Japan got a second enhanced edition of Joker 2 titled Joker 2 Professional that adds new monsters and abilities not found in the base version of Joker 2. Then after that, the Joker sub-series went dormant. Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3 was announced in the Weekly Jump in May 2015. Square announced further details in due course, including multiple new features. They include break monsters, aka more evil variants of monsters, strategy command, the ability to customize monsters and your hero, street pass, and of course multiplayer. And of course, mounts for the protagonist to ride. That said, like Dragon Quest VIII, 3D was not available in this release. Joker 3's setting is also unique, with its main location being somewhere called the Break World, featuring futuristic cities. That's something rarely featured at all in Dragon Quest, alongside the usual environments. That said, the story isn't as original, like in a lot of these light JRPGs, given the protagonist is an amnesiac trying to recover his memories while finding out where those dark break monsters I mentioned earlier originated. Joker 3 was released in Japan on the 24th of March 2016 to a fairly positive reception. However, that initial positive reception was slightly soured when just 7 months later, Square Enix announced Joker 3 Professional, which is effectively what the original Joker 3 should have been. You see, Joker 3 Professional added so much new content, the original Joker 3 became obsolete within a year of its release. The biggest addition was characters from the first two Joker games, including both protagonists. However, other additions include 200 new monsters, bringing the total up to 700 from 500, drone exploration, rideable large monsters with their own special attacks, new partner Notcherin, designed to help skip story content for players of the original, among other things, and most notably the world of Incarnus. This is a new area with a new story content featuring the Incarnus, divine monsters said to have lineage from the gods. In other words, they're absolutely massive, and with these mysterious themes of gods and a new world, comes further changes to the gameplay, and the returning cast from Joker 1 and 2. Well, why so much content? Well, to quote Square Enix, Joker 3 Professional is the grand finale of the Joker sub-series. They went all out with it! Of course, they're still making Monsters games, but they were done with the Joker sub-series. Looking at it critically, it's effectively a paid DLC that Square Enix chose not to add to the original Joker 3, but rather re-release it as a whole new product, knowing Dragon Quest fans would buy it. In a way, this DLC was a relief for Western fans hoping for a localization. If Square Enix was to ever localize Joker 3, it would be this version of the game. Of course, at this point, Dragon Quest VII and VIII were confirmed for the West, so fans were optimistic Square Enix might release some of the Dragon Quest spin-offs on 3DS while they still could. As expected, and as I touched on a bit with the end of the Dragon Quest VIII portion, this release didn't happen. Firstly, Square Enix, to their credit, told fans who asked on social media in 2017, but they weren't planning a localization. The source I found for this during my research was a post shared by the Dragon's Den Facebook page, where they told this person, Sean, that I'm afraid we have no plans to localize Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3 at the moment. Sorry! This is the standard PR response when asking game publishers directly about localizing games that they've not formally announced, as giving an honest answer would put their job at risk. However, Square Enix's transparency on this matter was refreshing, especially given that they haven't acknowledged other games directly like this, and this was a few months after Joker 3's release. It's likely Square Enix already decided not to localize Joker 3 or its then unannounced professional expansion. And to anyone doubting the legitimacy of this, for what it's worth, I remember the official Dragon Quest page making similar replies to other people asking similar questions on their page, back while Facebook had the wall feature for company pages, hence why I believe this is true. On the more positive side though, both versions of Joker 3 have full fan translations. The original Joker 3 fan translation came out promptly after its Japanese release, with many of the translators of this project also working on Dragon Quest Monsters 2 I mentioned earlier. However, Joker 3 Professional's fan translation was up in the air for years afterwards. It was apparently leaked from the original translation group. The details on this are kind of unclear. However, that doesn't take away the fact the definitive version of Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3 is playable in English on hacked 3DSs and on emulators. Joker 3's legacy is overall quite positive. It's considered to be among the best in the series among those who've played it, and a great send-off to the Joker sub-series. Additionally, with Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince, known as Dragon Quest Monsters 3, coming west, there is plenty of life left in this sub-series yet. Even though Joker 3 wasn't localised, it's safe to say audiences for The Dark Prince, as well as the experimental spin-off Treasures, which was the Monsters game, will be impacted by what the developers learned and added during Joker 3's time, even if they never played it. Additionally, as the final Dragon Quest spin-off title to be released for a dedicated gaming handheld, Joker 3 holds a unique label no other game will beat anytime soon. Dragon Quest XI is by far the most well-known game across this entire list. Nowadays it's available on all major platforms overseas, truly modernised the Dragon Quest franchise while respecting series traditions, and is objectively one of the best RPGs in recent years. It was first revealed in Shonen Jump in July 2015, but Square Enix planned to reveal a new Dragon Quest title in a livestream on July 28th that month. Rumours had already started before this livestream that Square Enix would reveal Dragon Quest XI, especially given a Wall Street Journal Japan reporter received a letter directly from Square Enix telling them as such. This livestream did confirm that yes, Dragon Quest XI is real. It showed gameplay and confirmed the game is coming to both PlayStation 4 and Nintendo 3DS. They were later dated for July 29th, 2017. The PS4 version is one you're already aware of. It was later released overseas with a Steam port added, and it looks amazing, but it was somewhat overshadowed at the time. One reason was the lack of localization information. While Yuji Horii himself confirmed Dragon Quest XI would get localized in 5 different languages one day before the Japanese release, he did not specify details, which is understandable because after all, that's the job of Square Enix marketing, not Yuji Horii. Also, a little side note, given how 2017 was full of amazing game releases, I think this delay was for the best. Dragon Quest XI would have been completely overshadowed if it came out that year, whereas 2018 was comparatively quiet, so Dragon Quest XI had the time to shine. The second reason for the overshadowing was the then upcoming Nintendo Switch version. At the time it was yet to be revealed or dated, but was anticipated by a sizable fan base. The Switch was not compatible with the version of Unreal Engine 4 that Square Enix were using to develop the PS4 version, so they had to rebuild the entire game in a new version once it was technically possible to, hence it's understandable that it took so long to be made. Finally, there's the existence of the gaming discussion today, the 3DS version of Dragon Quest XI. Now this is one you're more likely to know about. A lot of fan discourse at the time included whether Square Enix planned to even localise this version of this game. Reasons for the discourse include the history with Dragon Quest and Yuji Horii's localisation comments, both of which I've already explained. Additionally, as time has gone on, gaming YouTubers have produced videos discussing this curious version of the game, hence more awareness of this version exists. Finally, when Square Enix detailed the Switch version of Dragon Quest XI, they confirmed some of the 3DS exclusive content had been incorporated into it, officially acknowledging it outside of Japan. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. The 3DS version was developed from the ground up for the 3DS hardware. It's not a port of the PS4 version, where it was developed alongside the PS4 version. A similar example of this is EX Troopers by Capcom for the PS3 and the 3DS. The most notable aspect of this 3DS version is its versatility. You could play with either a fully 3D environment or a 2D sprite-based environment akin to the SNES classics, or even both. As you start the game, the 3D open world environment is placed on the top screen and the 2D classic mode is on the bottom. After a certain point you must pick one or the other, but you can switch anytime by going to a church. The 3D environment has a unique art style that is a halfway house between fully human-sized models and chibi for the characters, as well as PS2 era models for the NPCs and the world map. It's like what Square Enix would later use in Dragon Quest X Offline. There are also a handful of other features exclusive to this version, some of which were not incorporated into the Switch version. There is a memories mode allowing you to revisit any major scene in the game with the other visual style, which is very cool. Additionally, there is the ability to gather Yuchi or Tockles, as they'd be known overseas, via Street Pass or the in-game overworld. You would enter the labyrinth through time in a unique mode with these Tockles. This mode combines side-scrolling 2D platforming with RPG exploration. Upon defeating the bosses of each dungeon, you get passwords required to unlock the worlds of past Dragon Quest games. Plus you can see a 3D rendering of Tickington, something that's not added in the Definitive Edition re-release. The 3D renders also extend to the various worlds of past Dragon Quest games you visit in Tockington. While you can only visit 2D versions in Definitive Edition, it's possible to visit 3D renders in the 3DS version. It does make you wonder, why weren't these brought to the Definitive Edition too, Square Enix? As for its legacy, the 3DS version is best remembered as a curo that has been somewhat made redundant thanks to the release of the Definitive Edition of Dragon Quest XI's. That said, even now, there's still demand for the community for an English translation patch for this 3DS version. Given there is content that was never added in the Definitive Edition, it makes it easy to see why, and it might even happen someday. Of course, an official localization will never happen. Dragon Quest XI is available on all modern platforms nowadays, including the Stadia back when it existed. There is little reason to go back to an older version unless you're a massive fan of retro games, Dragon Quest, or import curios. However, its impact on the series cannot be understated. Without the 3DS version, Tockington and the 2D mode may not exist, given that it was originally implemented to help the 3DS version stand out from the PS4 version. As it stands, Square Enix themselves admitted that the PS4 version sold better than the 3DS version did overall, within a few weeks of the Japanese release. Another milestone is that it also led to a limited edition bundle pack of both the PS4 and 3DS versions of Dragon Quest XI in Japan. Yep, Nintendo and Sony didn't stop Square Enix from putting together this special bundle for Dragon Quest XI. Given the fact that both platforms are by different companies, it goes to show how important the Dragon Quest franchise is in Japan. Maybe in the future this will happen again for other platforms? Who knows? What we do know is that Dragon Quest XI will be a fondly remembered RPG for years to come. We're coming to the very end, and before I move to the conclusion, I want to touch on the 3DS ports of Dragon Quest 1, 2 and 3, which came out in Japan to celebrate the Japanese release of Dragon Quest XI. Dragon Quest 1 and 2's 3DS ports came out on the 10th of August 2017, where the port for Dragon Quest 3 followed later that month on 24th of August. Japanese PS4 owners also received these ports on the same day. However, these versions did not release in the West. However, the Switch ports did come out to celebrate the Definitive Edition re-release. These ports are still console exclusive to the Switch outside of Japan. Not even the PS4 versions of these ports came west. The flaws for these ports are very well known at this point, so I'm not going to go over them here, but if you do decide to get them, they are mobile phone ports, and the Switch release is the one to get due to physical Asian English release. Plus, as Dragon Quest 3 is getting a full HD 2D remake at some point, this mobile port is arguably redundant now, but I digress. That said, the one huge noteworthy achievement that relates to these ports is once Dragon Quest 3 on Nintendo 3DS released in Japan, Square Enix had a monumental achievement under their belt. At this point, by the end of the 3DS's life, every single mainline Dragon Quest game was now legally playable on a single platform, the Nintendo 3DS. That meant eShop ports of 1, 2 and 3, the DS remakes of 4, 5 and 6, the remakes of 7 and 8, alongside the DS originals of 9, the port of 10 and the native version of 11, could all be legally purchased and played on the 3DS. This also extends to the spin-offs too, like both Slime Morimori 2 and 3 are playable officially on the 3DS, alongside almost all Monsters games that came out at that point. There are more that I've missed, there are just so many, and that is a fantastic achievement. The 3DS became the ultimate platform for all things Dragon Quest in Japan because of Square Enix's fantastic support for Nintendo handhelds over the years. It all culminated towards this, and it will likely never be replicated ever again, except maybe on PC in the far future, or in a world where video game preservation is finally taken seriously, and game developers and publishers have to preserve their games, whether it be themselves or via libraries and not via piracy. Of course, nothing lasts forever. Nintendo shut down the eShop a few months ago, meaning there is now no legal way to purchase most of these games aside from physical copies. However, even if these games are trapped on legacy hardware, their legacy lives on, never forgotten by their makers, their fans, and their localizers. The Dragon Quest lineup on 3DS tells multiple stories which, as you've watched this video, I hope you've come to understand. The first is how Square Enix released a huge variety of Dragon Quest titles for the platform throughout its life, from some of the most unique spin-off games across the entire series, to remakes of classic titles that are almost universally considered the best way to play them. The second, how the reality of business shapes localization decisions for video games, especially for niche Japanese titles like Dragon Quest. The world of localization and business decisions can be cruel, especially before Japanese developers started developing games with a worldwide release in mind as standard, even when these decisions will be unpopular, something I and many other Dragon Quest fans can attest to. The first and most underappreciated one, the dedication and persistence of fan translators, meaning fans outside of Japan can finally experience the incredible Dragon Quest games Square Enix chose to leave behind. The passion is extraordinary and is up there with many visual novel fan translation groups, and given how visual novel fan translation groups help build that medium overseas, fans here help do the same for the Dragon Quest series. Nowadays, Dragon Quest has a bright future both in Japan and overseas. In Japan, the series continues to dominate with multiple spin-off titles, the juggernaut that is Dragon Quest X, as well as the upcoming mainline titles Dragon Quest III HD2 Remake and Dragon Quest XII, The Flames of Fate. As for the worldwide market, we get worldwide release announcements for most games as standard now alongside Japan, aside from a few noteworthy omissions, namely Dragon Quest X Offline. The most recent worldwide announcement as of this video was Dragon Quest Monsters 3, known as The Dark Prince overseas, being confirmed for a worldwide release this December. Square would never do this in the 3DS era, and it's thanks to the series' growth in the West following the amazing Dragon Quest XI that this is happening. Even some Dragon Quest phone games are now available overseas, including Dragon Quest of the Stars and Dragon Quest Tact. There's a common slogan that featured during this time fans often cited when discussing these 3DS games during the mid-2010s. Dragon Quest for the West. And looking back at what we got now, it's exactly what we got. Hello everyone, and thank you for getting to the end of this really long 3DS Dragon Quest retrospective video. Easily the biggest project yet on Milla's Game Room, so I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed making it. Also, during the Dragon Quest X section, I apologise if my voice sounded a bit funny. I was laughing a lot while recording that, and it was really difficult to finish it with a straight face, so if I sound weird, that's why. Also, please tell me your favourite Dragon Quest game from the games I've talked about here, even if you've not played it, because they're all really cool. Like, comment, subscribe, algorithm boosting stuff, notification bell, links in the description to optional donation bins, and fan patches I talk about in here. Especially for this video, please, I really hope this does well to justify the time I spent making it, because I'm probably not going to make another video this long for a long time if it doesn't do well, so I really hope it does well. Anyway, thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.